My name is Jason.
My name is Tom.
And this is Fear of a Black Dragon, an old-school RPG podcast.
And in this episode, enter freely, go safely, and leave something of the happiness you bring on our visit to the picturesque and gothic Ravenloft.
Our first segment is the Basic Crawl.
Ravenloft is a 32-page adventure written by Tracy and Laura Hickman for AD&D First Edition, designed for character levels 5 to 7, illustrated by Clyde Caldwell and published by TSR back in 1983. The first thing that you read after the introduction to the book is Count Strahd von Zarovich, who he is and how to play him. This is one full page, the first line of which is, "The entire adventure centers around the vampire." Then comes a 2-page spread entitled Fortunes of Ravenloft, and this is the gypsy card reading that foretells the adventure. You get a standard 52-card deck of playing cards, take out all the 2s, 4s, 6s, 8s, 9s, and jokers, and then draw 4 cards of what is left. The value of each one determines the location of a key item that will crop up later in the adventure. Those items are a holy symbol, the Tome of Strahd, a kind of book of lore and background that the PCs can discover. Strahd himself, that is a place where he can always be found, and the Sun Sword, which is a kind of powerful magical weapon. The suit of the card then shows a set of bonuses or penalties to attacks and armor class in that location, which is caused by like mystical energies or something, but basically it makes the player characters more or less powerful. Then there is a 5th card which determines what Strahd's overarching objective is in this instance of the adventure. And all of this is conveyed to the players through just vague enough clairvoyant talk. Not the exact locations, but that the items exist in a sort of woolly allusion to Strahd's goals. That comes in a little short bit of box text, providing the necessary gothic atmosphere.
Tom, I have a deck of playing cards in front of me. Why don't we draw one just to give listeners an example of how this works?
Okay, yeah, sure. Let's do the first one, which is the holy symbol. Yeah, okay. What's your card?
I have drawn a Jack of Spades.
So I would then read this bit of box text. This card is a symbol of great power. It tells of a powerful force for good and protection against the forces of darkness. And I then consult the location part. So the Jack means it's the crypt of Sergei von Zarovich. So I say, this lies with a fallen prince of old. The brother of dark is light, and he rests in this place. And then consulting the suit, it was spades, right? That's very, I think that's bad. The PCs suffer a -1 penalty to attacks and a +1 penalty to their armor class when they go to this place. That's the mechanical thing. You don't tell the players that. What you tell them is, the spade is a dark shadow of evil cast over that place. You fight under its influence here. And that's it.
Nice.
Let's crack on with the contents anyway. Then after you've done those bits of preparatory reading and card drawing, you get to a description of the setting. So you get Lands of Barovia. That is the name of the Count's domain. It contains random encounter tables, and plus a line that I particularly like, which is, each night the PCs stay anywhere other than in the castle, Area K, Strahd attacks with his wolves and bats. Then there's the start of the adventure, which has a section called A Desperate Plea for Help, and this is a kind of initiation scene where the adventurers receive a letter from the town's burgomaster. That letter later turns out to be forged, but never mind, because, whatever. And then you get into the, assuming that they, agree to what the letter requests and go to Barovia. There are planned encounters rather than random ones, and a description of what happens when you meet Strahd and his creatures throughout the town and countryside in the area. That area consists of the Svalich Woods, home of the Wargwolves, the village of Barovia, once a prosperous town, now without hope. The Burgomaster's mansion, where Strahd is kind of lurking around, mooning over the young lady Irina Kolyana, and the Gypsy Camp, temporary home to Madame Ava and her troupe. She's the fortune teller. And then the main attraction, Castle Ravenloft, Strahd's home and fortress, which is divided into the main floor, the Court of the Count, Rooms of Weeping, the Spires of Ravenloft, the fabulously named Larders of Ill Omen, and then the dungeon and catacomb. After all of this, that's the bulk of the book is Castle Ravenloft. Then right at the end is an optional ending. After 500 years, Tatiana and Sergei are reunited. Then appendices with new monsters, NPCs, treasures. The Tome of Strahd, which describes how he became the first vampire. That's Vampyr. And then there is a hex map of Barovia and surrounds, and a particularly attractive, I think, isometric map of the castle itself. And that's it.
Terrific. Let's talk about things we liked. I will say I am currently in the middle of running this module. I'm about 4 sessions in. I have the 5th and final session tonight. And the thing I'm loving about Ravenloft the most is the pacing of Ravenloft. It feels very much like a module written by a novelist. It has a very a very novel-like or film-like sort of pacing, I guess. There's a tension. Like, as you are, you get your mission, you're on the old Svalich road, you are having these, encounters which are increasingly sort of haunting and scary. There's a lot of mystery surrounding it. You pass through the gates of Barovia, and the gates close behind you, and the sort of dangerous supernatural mists settle in around you, and you're just being cordoned closer and closer to Castle Ravenloft, right? You move through the village. There are a few little things that can happen that sort of increase the tension, ramp up the terror, and then you have this. You get through the village, you go to the gypsy camp. I say Vistani because that's what they are eventually called in the setting, I think, once 2E comes out. And also because gypsy's kind of a antiquated, a problematic name, right?
It's a loaded term, perhaps.
Yeah. And, so you have that whole encounter with the fortunes, the fortune telling and all that stuff with Madame Ava. You take this haunted carriage ride up the mountain, and then you have the castle itself, right? There's just a terrific story-like quality to it, how you move through everything. The tension is fantastic. I think it's all unfurled in a really, really beautiful way. I just love that part of it.
Yeah, I have to agree. And actually, just as an aside, it's happened before with other modules we covered, but in Ravenloft in particular, it confronts me with the problem that, since my regular Tuesday night game is largely designed to funnel material into this podcast, if we cover something and I read it and I really want to run it, I kind of can't because it's a waste to run it once we've already done it. So
I'm having the same problem. I've been wanting to run Slumbering Ursine Dunes ever since we talked about it, but every time I think about putting it on my calendar, I have that thought of, well, we've already covered it on Fear of a Black Dragon. I could be doing something different right now. Yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, I should get something specific that I like about it. And I think what makes it work for me is that although the module doesn't always take the Gothic elements seriously, and if we think about the origins of the genre, and think about how the Castle of Otranto begins with a wedding interrupted by a giant helmet falling out of nowhere and killing the groom. It's it's not the most gritty and down to earth genre, but it does always play it with a straight face. And I think that's to its credit. It doesn't camp things up or kind of get a bit arch and meta and go, oh, look, we're doing Gothic stuff now. It just does it and gets on with it.
Yeah, I agree. I had that same feeling reading it. There's definitely a lot of genre going on here, right? There's a very specific kind of genre feel to the module that I think is quite distinct from even from fantasy things you find, nowadays, and definitely back then, right? And in terms of fantasy gaming. There's a very very specific genre feel to it, but like you said, it does not devolve into the camp, except for one part, which I think we're going to talk about later. But for the most part, that the way it's delivered with this, it has an earnestness to it, right? The text is very earnest in the way it presents things to you, but you also get the distinct feeling that the authors kind of know what they're doing, right? And they know what they're dealing with, and they're not oblivious to the genre tropes and conventions, right?
Yeah, that's true. Well, what else did you like about it?
I think the village of Barovia itself is really fascinating. You are meant to kind of just move through it fairly quickly. I don't think it's meant to be a centerpiece of the story. My group had different plans. My group really loved the village of Barovia, and they wanted to explore it. They wanted to find out, what was going on there. So just so listeners have some context, the village is very, for a modern day reference, if you've ever played the video game Bloodborne, it's that. Like, you go into this burned out, hollowed out, mostly abandoned village. The only people who are left are hiding behind locked doors, like they won't come out, and they just sort of like whisper and mutter things and laugh to themselves or say weird things. There are a few little businesses that are still open for some reason, and you can kind of interact with those things. But the village of Barovia is such a tantalizing place on the page, and you really want to know more about it. And it actually makes a ton of sense why TSR decided to eventually make Ravenloft its a whole campaign setting for 2E, right? Like, because you want to know more about this. Like, my players rather, they were very interested in all the stuff going on around Castle Ravenloft, right? So, I did eventually get them to the castle, but there's, and again, it just goes back to like how beautifully and mysteriously presented it all is.
Yeah, I think it is very well presented, actually. And what you mentioned about the writers knowing what they're doing is that a notable feature of this era is box text. And as we move from around Ravenloft period of time into like AD&D second, that box text is going to get bigger and bigger historically. But at the moment, it's mostly tolerably long, and it's easy to kind of glance at the box, spot what you're meant to say that's kind of important about this location or this event. And that's really well done. And they still throw in little flourishes of Gothic flavor.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, in practice, it's true. I run lots of old stuff with World of Dungeons. I'm doing Ravenloft and World of Dungeons. And I normally kind of, I fast forward in places, or I kind of skip things, or I kind of zoom forward to the things that interest me most. I'm not doing that with Ravenloft. I'm actually, I'm going through the module pretty close to as written. And I'm loving the box text. Like, the box text, it feels like, they just feel like scene transitions almost, or like it's like a little sort of just a little thing you give to the players, and then you kind of turn them loose in the scene, right? It's just long enough. It just begs to be read in a creepy voice, or like a dark, somber voice, right? Like,
yeah.
It has a certain flourish to it that makes you want to do that. I think it's really good. I enjoy that part of it a lot too. The other thing I will say about this module, which is so great, is the actual dungeon crawl itself. It's the bulk of the book, and that's Castle Ravenloft. It is so good. I mean, I am not normally one to be bowled over by a dungeon crawl. Like, I've seen some really cool ones, but a lot of dungeon crawls, like, there's tons of like empty rooms, or it's, they feel a little bog standard, or there's just not, I don't often feel like, oh, this is special. Castle Ravenloft is special. It is multiple stories, like 7 or 8 or something. It's a bunch. Tons of stories, many rooms in each one. All of them, most of the rooms have something really interesting going on. You can see how Castle Ravenloft was a massive influence on media to come. I'm thinking of the Dark Souls video games. This was written in 1983, and so much of it reads like Dark Souls, the role-playing game, right? There are particular encounters. There's one called the Guardian. I think it's called the Guardian of Sorrow or something like that. It's a tower. It's like a living tower.
Is it the one with the glass heart thing? Right? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a big red glass heart and a bunch of animated halberds that like attack you. Like, it's so video game, right? And it just reads as super dramatic. The castle is really fucking cool.
It is. I think it feels like, obviously we just described the most obviously kind of insane magical trap part of it. But apart from that, it does feel like a place that was lived in. And then obviously a vampire took over. So now the monsters that are there have sort of picked their parts out of the previous occupants' home to make their home in. And I'm not going to go out on a limb and say, oh, it all makes such great sense, because it probably doesn't. But just there is this feeling that it sort of is logical, and the things you find belong in the places where you find them.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'll say another thing too. The authors did a great job of, the module is written and laid out so that you elicit the appropriate responses from the players. In the very beginning of the castle, when you are entering like the sort of like main entryway, there are these 4 dragon statues, right? And they're called out specifically in the box text, so the players are already thinking, well, there must be something about these red dragon statues. And in fact, what happens is the statues do nothing on the way in, but if you try to leave, they animate and attack you. And that moment was like so pregnant with tension with my group, because they just knew those dragon statues were something, right? But they couldn't quite figure out right away what the deal was. But the genuine, palpable sense of like apprehension that they approached that one little area with signaled to me that the authors had done a really good job with this.
Right. I think that signaling tension is the real key here. It's like what Graham Walmsley talks about in his Cthulhu Dark related materials, is that a lot of people try to create horror by not telling players stuff. But in this case, and in your classic Cthulhu Dark outline, what you do is you warn people not to go somewhere, and then you kind of force them to go there anyway. And then that's what Ravenloft does. It keeps telling you, well, you might want to watch out for this. You don't want to go there. But you kind of have to, so...
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, there's like no other way into the castle in that one example, right?
Yeah. And actually, that brings me on to the last thing I want to say in the what we liked section, which is the Fortunes of Ravenloft that we just did our totally real card draw to illustrate. Because that's literally foreshadowing. But also, there is the thing is that as written, you're supposed to do it in an interestingly meta way. It seems like you're supposed to do it in front of the players, but not with their characters necessarily present. Just a sort of like some kind of cutscene of an old fortune-telling woman. Like,
it's super meta, yeah.
Like just saying what's going to happen. And then if they go and have a fortune-telling again later in the adventure, you do it again and you change what's going to happen and where all the things are based on that new one. And that idea that they actually are... I mean, would you actually tell them this is really changing something? Maybe you would, or they'd at least get an inkling that something's happening here.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't actually, because of the way I had the series set up for me on my calendar, I didn't use the Fortunes of Ravenloft thing, or I did a kind of version of it, which I'll talk about later. But I get what you're saying there. I mean, this sort of like meta version of it almost feels like, I don't know, it just has this really cool feeling of like the module, the setting asserting itself into the real world or something.
Yeah, or, right? You know, it's just made me think of as well, this is weird, is the opening of the David Lynch Dune movie, you know, where the princess appears and explains what's going on.
Princess Illyriana or whatever it is. Yeah,
she's never going to interact with any of the characters as far as I recall. I think she's there at the end when he fights
for
Sting.
Like 2 seconds and she doesn't speak. Yeah.
But she does that, you know, here, House of Trade, here, House of...
That's her name,
Irulan, yeah. I guess it would be a bit like that, yeah. It's this sort of odd, like, narrator figure who's not really in this play, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it, yeah.
Interesting.
Love it. Well, so let's talk about questions we had. Tom, I know you had some.
Yeah, okay. Number one, it's at the beginning, the players get a letter from the Burgermeister of Barovia, but it turns out it's a forgery, and the real one... Yeah, this is weird. They later find his real letter, which is telling everyone, don't come to Barovia, but they get one that's allegedly from him that says, do come to Barovia. Now, I think I have an inkling of... Well, I think it was probably Strahd, right, that forged it. But why? Yeah, I quite like that it's a dangling plot thread, but I mean, it's weird.
I mean, I'll tell you, it should be obvious, I guess, but I'll tell you why it's that way, like why there's the real letter and the forged letter. And indeed, it played out perfectly in game. I'll tell you, like, in play, this little weird plot device had the exact intended effect that the authors had on my group, which is they had the forged letter, and the forged letter says, please come help us. There's tons of treasure here. You can have it. The real letter says, don't come help us, seal the city off, burn it down, and then just grab the treasure, right? And what it did in play was it totally changed the group's expectations, right? The group is thinking, oh, this is something that we can, it's like just a little adventure. We're going to go there. We're going to help this people. We're going to help this Burgermeister and his daughter, and we're going to get the silver, right? But then when it turned out that was a forgery, and then they found the real letter. And so for a while they had the 2 letters that had different information, right? And then they discovered that the one was a forgery, and suddenly it became, oh shit, we shouldn't have come.
Yeah.
And that moment like felt good in play. It was like, oh fuck, maybe we shouldn't have come here, So, but I think it was Strahd, and I guess maybe he forged it because he did want people to come, I don't know, to fuck with them. It's unclear.
Yeah, it seems like one of those kind of supervillain plans where like you invite the heroes just so you can beat them. I don't know. Yeah, it's like...
There's a lot of evidence that Strahd is just kind of fucking with the group, so maybe that's what it is. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, so I have a second question, though, which is more practical, I think, which is that, okay, in the catacombs, there are a whole series of graves which have the names of their occupants or ostensible occupants engraved on them. Quite a few of them are really appalling puns. And while I appreciate this is sort of in the Hammer horror tradition of having a kind of comic relief bit, the question is, when would you not use them? Because I think sometimes it might be a bad idea to have a guy called something like Sir Ariel Diplomet who died from falling.
Right, yeah. I'm in a weird place with that part of the dungeon. For one thing, it's at the very end of the module, and it almost feels like a joke on the author's part. All these little crypts with all their little funny names and things. I got the impression of like, the haunted house ride at Disneyland where you're going through and the tombstones all have like little pun, names on them or whatever. Yeah. I had that kind of impression. Like it was meant to be just a little like sort of pressure valve comedy thing. I don't think I would do that in the actual module. I probably wouldn't like read the names off or whatever.
Wouldn't at all. No, yeah. I think I'd just improv variations on it.
Yeah. I just don't think I would do it. Yeah. I just think I'm not even, because I guess it would depend on when they found these tombs, but I think it would probably ruin the tone a little bit.
That's true. Actually, it's theoretically possible they would go there. That would be the first thing they find, and then maybe it doesn't matter and you can do these gags. But if it's at the end when you're in a desperate fight,
yeah, my group never got there, so I don't, and they're not going to, I don't think, based off where we're at right now. So yeah, I didn't have to worry about it, but I think I probably would skip it. I had a question too. So one of the difficulties I've had with the module so far is because I play online, the map situation is kind of hard. Because the castle map is multiple stories, all of which, or most of which, the group has access to whenever they want. They just got to go up a flight of stairs, right? And I'm having a tough time like managing all of that, and I was wondering like, would this be easier face to face? But I'm not sure it would, because face to face, presumably you're not just putting the maps in front of the group, right? Because it's got secret doors and stuff on it. So how would you handle the map situation, Tom?
Wow. I don't even know. Secret passages on maps are the bane of my existence, honestly.
I fucking hate it. Why did it's so, like, put it in the text. Don't put it in the goddamn map,
Yeah. Actually, I do have a solution, which is use dungeon maps with science fiction games where they've already scanned the dungeon from orbit and then just give them the frickin' floor plan. But apart from that...
There we go. Stay frosty, Ravenloft, right?
Yeah. But apart from that... Yeah, it's tough. One thing I do is I tend to cut up maps when I'm doing it online and just paste the bits they're in into a shared Google drawing. So I think that would work okay with isometric things, although again, you might have to get tricky with secret doors. But yeah, it is just kind of annoying. I'm not really sure there is a way around it apart from just tracing over the map as you go and showing it to them that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting away with just like showing them the map because even if they see on the map there's a secret area, I still make them do the, plus wisdom roll or whatever to find such things. But, so like as a meta thing, the players know it's there, but the characters don't know. That's very like not OSR though, right? I mean, where you're supposed to like, like kind of be presented with challenges, right? And solve them. I'm just curious, like, just sort of cosmically, like how do groups handle this, right? Like, do you just put the map in front of the people? Surely you don't just like describe it and have the players map it. It would be a mess because this thing is so intricate,
I think the particularly old school thing is, you have to describe it and then maybe let them start to map it and help them a bit if they're screwing up. That I think is
that must be it. Yeah, it just sounds so tedious. God, sounds awful.
I think it's not great. I don't think Ravenloft Castle is not great for going along and mapping for the reasons you describe. It's loads of rooms, there's so many stories. I might end up just doing a kind of, what's the word I'm after? Like a kind of point crawl thing where you draw a picture of a room and then just connect it via a line and that leads to this and this leads to this.
That's a good idea. Yeah, it's a good idea. That's kind of what I'm doing in practice because I'm not having them go like room by room so much. I'm kind of like funneling them towards like the major encounters basically, but yeah, it's a similar idea. Let's do the chain lightning round. The moment the party steps through the gates of Barovia, love that.
Yes.
it's almost a little goofy in the beginning, like because the gates like open on their own. Ooh. And then you step in and the gates close on their own and then the mists settle in. On paper, it reads a little goofy. In play, it actually works really well.
Yeah, I think so. Well, right, because it's all, haha, this is funny. Oh, wait, we seriously can't get back out? Oh, okay.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like the way the book is ordered with Strahd as the first thing that you read about. It's really, I think it's a bold decision. Like most things would save the major villain right to the end of the book. But this one, first thing, this adventure's about the vampire. Here's the vampire. If you forget everything else, remember the vampire.
I'm going with the carriage ride. At a certain point, the party gets to the, just out of the woods, and there is a carriage. Again, very like genre, tropey, black horses, snorting in the mist, and, a black carriage. The carriage door opens by itself. But that encounter is actually really great because the party is like super nervous about it, and they want to investigate the carriage. Like, is there a trap? Is there this? Is there that? And then it just turns out that the carriage is taking them up to the castle. It's kind of great.
Yeah, in a similar vein, there's a bit I actually want to quote because I think it's an excellent lift of. It's actually a direct lift from Chapter 2 of Dracula, but converted into a D&Dism, which is when you're walking from that gateway through the woods, I think it is, towards the village. Roll 1d6 every turn the PCs are in the woods. If the result is 4 or more, the PCs hear a lone wolf cry in the distance. 1 more wolf cries each round. If the PCs are still in the woods after 5 rounds of howling, the wolves attack.
Love that. At one point in the village, you might even miss it, but if you're around at the right time of day, you can see a procession of ghosts leaving the church cemetery and making their way up the mountain to Castle Ravenloft. And these ghosts are adventurers. They are wizards and clerics and warriors, and they are going to finish their mission to kill Count Strahd. A terrific bit of like tension building for the party, right? It's like, look at all these people who failed.
That's nice. My last one is there's an odd little leitmotif of statues in alcoves that have shadows or patterns of light playing across their faces. It just crops up a few times, just enough to be noticeable, but not enough times to be a real kind of recurring theme. It's I don't know, it's a little oddity that I like.
And I have a bonus chain lightning round. It's not a specific moment. It's more of just like a kind of feeling, but you get the distinct impression that Count Strahd is fucking with the party a lot of the time, right? There are a lot of like moments where it just feels like Count Strahd is just like bored and amusing himself, right? I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but it's just a general sense. It's kind of cool. Let's go to the Expert Delve. Our next segment is the Expert Delve. So we have a pretty straightforward, quick Expert Delve for you today. And that is sort of kicking off the adventure. I think that's what we're talking about, right, Tom?
Yeah, so I have a theoretical way I would do it, and then you have already done it, so let's compare the two. I think what I would do is I would open with the Fortunes of Ravenloft card reading, but it's one that all the player characters are present for in the Vistani camp within the confines of Barovia. And once it's done, we'd then flash back to them just arriving at the gates that will slam shut behind them and so on and so forth in a kind of, here's how you got here, maybe a few hours or a day earlier. And then I would just kind of use, as we progress through those opening scenes approaching the village, painting the scene kind of questions or like just general character questions to bring out the bit about the forged letter and all that kind of stuff. So what was it that compelled you to come here based on what you read in this letter? Or how could you tell that the mysterious bearer of the letter was wise in the ways of folk magic? That kind of stuff, just to convey what happened in the scene without actually having to do the scene.
That's really good. I wish I had thought of opening with the fortune card reading, like a sort of out-of-character card reading. I think that would have been really dramatically cool. I actually do that a lot in my games as a general matter, where I cut away to a scene that I sort of dictate to the group that the characters are not aware of. It's just something the players are aware of. That's a very cinematic way of approaching role-playing games, and I like it. I think that's a really, really great touch on that one, Tom. As a general matter, I like what you did, what you've proposed there, this idea of kind of pushing past the encounter at the inn where the letter gets pressed into their hand, and indeed where they are given the chance to not go on the adventure if they just ignore the letter, right? I just get right past that, as we know. You know, what I did, and this will be sort of hearkening back to a couple of episodes ago when we talked about Into the Fire, and we talked about sort of kicking off a World of Dungeons version of a module. And again, this is not like specific to World of Dungeons, but I think this approach works great for a system that encourages more of a narrative focus type of play or cinematic play, right? And so what I did is I started them on the old Svalich Road right before they get to the perimeter of Barovia. And I had, based off this sort of characters I had 3 characters at the start. I ended up with 5 in the future sessions, but at the start I had 3. 2 of them knew each other, and the third was a thief who had just escaped from the clutches of the witch who raised him. And so the 2 characters were on the road, and the thief character had been following them for a while, watching them. The 2 characters on the road had the letter in their possession. They had already, we did the scene at the inn off screen. So I hard framed, like I said a couple of episodes ago, as I described a couple of episodes ago in my process, I hard framed them like right towards this, right? They already had the letter in their hand. They're already on the old Svalich Road. And so they're not getting out of the adventure. Right?
No.
Ravenloft is happening. And then I did what you've suggested, which is I then proposed establishing questions to all 3 of them about why they might want to head to the village of Barovia in addition to the letter, or what is about the letter that made them want to go there. And I actually have those establishing questions handy. I'll read them here. Okay, so my establishing questions were: someone important to you went missing in Barovia. Who was it? Why have you so far refused to investigate their disappearance? But why are you going now? Turned out it was the character's mother, who was a religious outcast. She went to Barovia to ply her trade, and he had not heard from her in some time. So that's what happened there. For another character who was a member of a sun-worshipping cult, a foundational myth of your sun cult has its origin in Castle Ravenloft. What is it? In what ways does this inform why you might be interested in exploring the castle? So see, there, I'm already suggesting you're going to be at the castle, right? But you at least get to tell me why you are wanting to go to the castle. And
yeah, I just want to jump in to say, did you plant the sun cult thing? Because that's conveniently matching the sun sword as an item, or was that just a happy coincidence?
No, my brilliant player did that, but it was a perfect matchup for the sun sword. He ended up calling it a sun lance, but hey, it works.
It's all good. Yeah.
It's all good. And then for the thief character who was watching them, who had escaped from a witch, the old witch used to speak of an object in Castle Ravenloft, possibly magical, but definitely very valuable. What is it? Why do you want it? And his answer, which I thought was really terrific, was there is a doll or a puppet that contains the essence of the witch's childhood, and he wants to get it to have some power over her.
Yeah, yes, creepy magic dolls. Good.
Yes. Also very on genre, right? So.
Also, and it gives you great reason to have to go into creepy bedrooms with 4-poster beds, stuff like that.
And I'll just say one more note about how I kick things off. I did that. I put them on the road. I had their establishing questions. Another thing I did was I started in Medias Res too. So, I had it as I've described, 2 on the road, 1 in the foliage watching them, right? And then I had a sort of maiden draped in moonlight, right? Like at the other end of the road, 40 or 50 paces ahead. Again, very like on genre. Turns out to be a vampiress who does not want to be a vampiress. She was turned recently into a vampire. And basically she approaches the group. I roll the die of fate, first of all, to see what the approach is like. If it had been a low roll, it would have been a more hostile, violent encounter. It ended up being a higher roll. And so what I did was, I had this young woman, she's walking barefoot, not dressed for travel. She approaches them and has an axe in her hand. She has a hatchet in her hand, and she thrusts the hatchet in the player character's hand and says, please release me from my torment, right? And through a series of investigations and discussions with her, they figure out she's a vampire, and it proceeds from there. Really, really terrific in Medias Res scene. Players, you can absolutely steal it. It was a great way of like getting the action going, but without it being a fight straight away.
Nice.
So yeah, that's how I handled it. I think what I did was very much in the spirit of the module, even if I wasn't following it like precisely.
Yeah, I agree. Because there is a vampiress or two later on, so it's not exactly adding anything too outlandish, and it's interesting actually when people talk about in Medias Res beginnings, they often think of action sequences and stuff like that, but just suddenly having something to discuss very intensely all of a sudden is equally good.
Well, I think one other thing I should mention here, this is not about like kicking off the adventure, but I do think it's relevant to this whole idea of the fortune cards, right? And the card reading. I didn't do as you suggested, where you like do the card reading as a meta thing in the beginning, but I did bring that theme or that motif of the module into it in a different way. Well, I tried to. And the encounter actually didn't quite go as I thought it was going to go. But what I would have done, if it had gone the way I wanted to, is they were going to get to Madame Eva, and Madame Eva was going to do a card reading for each of them. They enter into her tent, and she kind of, what she was going to do was, in the module, she speaks about their past exploits, right, as a way of showing her power, right? But because I don't have access to that, because these aren't characters who I've been following before this adventure, what I was going to do was basically I was going to ask each of the players, tell me about your past exploits, just out of character, tell me about them. And then they were going to go through, tell me all their past exploits. And then I was going to have Madame Eva kind of like repeat that back to them, but like slightly nuanced or shaded in a creepier way, right? As a way of showing her power. So that was how I handled that. But then what I was going to do with the card reading was I was basically going to roll a D6, and the result on the D6 was going to be a number of different things. So I'll read them off. So all of this was going to be dressed up with tons of me sort of camping it up, in the role play and describing things in a creepy way, of course. Yeah. But basically, on a 1, the character is informed that they will never leave Castle Ravenloft once they step inside. So that's the worst result, and that was that. 2, the character is somehow marked by Strahd. Strahd will be particularly interested in this player character for some reason. Mm-hmm. Number 3, Madame Eva shows them some possibilities for how they might die. And here I used a variation of my Visions of Death move for Dungeon World, whereby they can tell me before any roll, oh, this is a vision that Madame Eva showed me. And then they roll. And if they get a miss on that roll, then they might die. They go straight to last breath, right? So, or our version of it in Wodu. On a 4, Madame Eva tells the PC the location of an icon of the icon of Ravenloft, which is one of the items, the big, sort of quest items. On a 5, Madame Eva tells the PCs something about the Burgomaster's daughter, that behind her lies a great treasure. That's in quotes. In fact, what she means is that behind the painting of Strahd's long-dead lover, Tatiana, area K37, there is a great treasure. So just a bit of a, kind of a misdirect there. Mm-hmm. And on a 6, Madame Eva tells the PCs something about the goal of their establishing questions. So that's where that's their chance to kind of have that reincorporated into the adventure there. So that's how I handled it, to get that flavor.
Yeah, my favorites there are definitely 1 and 5. 5 because it's a bit of a Hammer horror trope of it being, the ancestor that looks identical to the modern person kind of thing. And number 1 because I've used that technique before where like a person of power or the villain tells a player character, like I most recently used it in Qelong, you're going to die in this valley, little girl. Even if it's just their opinion, it seems to have a lot of weight as a thing to say. So
it does, yeah. Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's go to Companion Adventures. Hi, listeners. 2 things I want to tell you about today. First, we are giving away 3 softcover copies of Emily Care Boss's game, The Romance Trilogy, in February. For a chance to win one, all you have to do is follow us on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG. Our Twitter followers will be entered into drawings taking place on February 14th, 21st, and 28th. And we're doing these Twitter drawings all year, so be sure to follow us at Gauntlet RPG. The second thing I want to tell you about is the new issue of Codex. It's called Codex Blood 2, and it will be in our Patreon feed through February. It is the best issue of Codex yet. Here's what's inside. Dia de los Muertos, which are procedures for a 4-session gaming event involving the final girl and Cheat Your Own Adventure. 5 more blood-soaked magic items for Dungeon World. The Croatoa, a dark and intense OSR scenario. Our newest Gauntlet daddy, Fang Bang, and 3 dozen cult horror movies. To get access to Codex Blood 2, just make a $4 pledge on the Gauntlet Patreon by February 28th. As a bonus, you'll also get the original Codex Blood. So go to patreon.com/gauntlet and check it out. Thanks. It's the Companion Adventures. Why don't we start with music? I am going to say the classical piece Danse Macabre by Camille Saint-Saëns. I happen to think that piece sounds like the interior of much of Ravenloft.
Yes.
Particularly the dining rooms, the ballrooms, things like that.
Yeah, it's great. Unfortunately for UK-based players, it may have the unfortunate connotation of also being the theme tune to whimsical detective show Jonathan Creek, but as long as your players haven't watched that, it's fine. And my music one actually is a spot of jazz, specifically Miles Davis's soundtrack for the 1958 Louis Malle film Ascenseur pour les chauffeurs, which is an excellent film, by the way. It's a sort of latter-day film noir that was also a progenitor of the Nouvelle Vague. That's not really relevant to this. The point is that Miles Davis's mournful, kind of just mind-blowingly good improvised score for it is amazing. And it inspired the whole genre of dark jazz by bands like Bohren und der Club of Gore, who actually are arguably a better suggestion for this, because they're deliberately going out to be creepy, and they have all these really kind of low bass notes. But I think it would be remiss of me to recommend the latter-day followers as opposed to, come on, Miles Davis.
Let's do films. I went back and forth on this. I was going to say Hammer Films also, but that's what you put in your notes, so I'm not going to steal it. Instead, I'm going to say maybe an obvious choice, I'm not sure, but I'm going to go with Bram Stoker's Dracula from the 90s. In many ways, not a great movie, but in some ways a good movie. I'm going with it, though, because I think that Bram Stoker's Dracula captures a particular tone really well. It has a lushness to it. It has a very Baroque quality to it. But it also has just a touch of camp, a touch of melodrama, particularly in Gary Oldman's performance as Dracula. So I'm going to go with that one.
Yeah, I agree. It's a flawed film. That's very clear, but its good bits are particularly good. My film recommendation is, let's be honest, any Hammer horror vampire flick. Yeah. But for the sake of argument, I thought I'd better pick one. So I'm going to say Twins of Evil from 1971, starring Peter Cushing. A film I think best described as lurid. And if I can quote from the poster, which is in kind of bright yellow and purple, one uses her beauty for love, one uses her lure for blood. And it kind of, that's pretty much it. The whole soundtrack is available on YouTube, by the way, so that's cool.
An internet suggestion. I've been following this Twitter account called Strad von Z. It's a Strad von Zarovich parody account. It's not some huge internet account. It's not like a big major comedy thing or anything, but, and he doesn't post up too frequently, but whenever the posts do go up, they're pretty good. Basically, this Strad von Zarovich Twitter personality tweets about various civic affairs of Barovia, usually through the lens of current affairs in the real world, as well as posting things like polls on which animal should I zombify next.
And my final one, unusually, is photography. I think this is our first photography companion adventure. And that is Patrizio Di Renzo's photo shoot, which you can find on his website, with the actor Mads Mikkelsen. And he's sort of posing in this weird kind of louche but post-apocalyptic way in these kind of dark, grungy clothes that have something of the recently turned grave about them. And it's basically how I picture Strahd.
Awesome. Well, that's our show. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can go to the community section of Google+. Just search the community section for the Gauntlet. You will find us there. We are on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG, a very newly active Twitter, by the way. Go check out our Gauntlet Twitter feed. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com, and we're on Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet. Tom, thanks so much.
Thank you, Jason.
And thanks, listeners. Take care.
Still listening, listener? Good. You've discovered the bonus content of the Ravenloft Purple Prose Lightning Round.
Chain Lightning!
At last you have arrived. Her sudden cackling laughter bursts like mad lightning from her withered lips.
Huge iron gates hang on the stonework. Dew clings with cold tenacity to the rusted bars.
The canopy of mist and branches overhead suddenly gives way to black clouds boiling far above.
The woods have the silence of a forgotten grave, yet exude the feeling of an unsounded scream. There was less purple prose than I was expecting. That's pretty much all I could find.